there's a fellow leaning over an altar carving something up, and it says sacrifice, things like that. And we started looking at little longer things, little inscriptions on jugs, wine jars, things like that, on the statue where there's a gladiator looking awfully sad with all his armor broken up, and the goddess has got an arm around him, and it says that how he's fallen down and has passed over. That is the traditional word for dying, and he's seeking refuge and succor from the goddess. So we then knew we could read Etruscan. We tackled the largest inscriptions we could find and are known in Etruria. One is the Perugia Epos, about 36 lines of writing. Another one is the Pergi tablets, 3 gold tablets, one in Carthaginian, Punic, and 2 in Etruscan. And they were found at the port of Coelbren near Rome there. And they told a credible story. They told of a league, apparently between Carthage and Etruria. Carthage is here, Etruria here. And what had happened is that when Cyrus, the emperor of Persia, got on the throne about 546 BC, he sent his general Harpagus along the coast here, and Harpagus' job was to clean up all the Greek cities, and most of them submitted. And he came to the Phocians and he said, look, knock down one tower of your wall, give us one house in the city for the emperor, and everything will be all right. They said, give us 24 hours to think it over. So he said, fine. Next morning he came along with his army, and he found that the entire town had taken to the ships with all their women, children, everything they could carry, and had gone away. The Phocians sailed away, tried to get land here, couldn't get it, came round to Sardinia. And they thought it'd be a very good idea to set up as pirates. So they set up as pirates, and they traded on preying on the Etruscan fleets here and the Carthaginian fleets, the merchant fleets. So a league was formed between Carthage and Etruria to provide 60 ships each, a war fleet, to track down these Phocians and destroy them, which they did. And the Phocians were driven out of there, and they finished up here in Sicily. But that's what these tablets tell you in Welsh. I'm calling it Welsh because it's probably Cumbric, right? We tackled the Agnone tablet from the Adriatic coast, which told of the origin of these people, how they come to be in Etruria. I'll tell you that later, if you like. So we're fairly confident we could deal with this. We tackled the few Wrightian inscriptions, and they work out as well, no problem. So we then moved further back in time, and we got over to Turkey, tackled some of the inscriptions there. Primarily, the longest one we could get our hands on was the inscription over the supposed tomb of Midas, and that turns out to translate perfectly, logically, very well in the same technique, reading in the same language. So what we've got is a language coming from the east to the west, dying out in the east, dying out in Etruria, which is known to have died out there. And if you read Pliny and others, they'll say how Etruscan is totally different from Latin. There's no comparison. It's totally different from Greek. So it's died out in the Mediterranean areas, but it's been preserved around there in Wales. This is the situation we have. This is the background then against which we're working when we get an approach from Jim Michael. And he says to us, can you assist us? Do you know what this alphabet might be? And we say, yeah, sure. We know what it is. So while he's pressurizing us to sort of look west, we're saying to him, go away. We're going east. We're on to a roots exercise. We're going backwards. And we've gone a lot further. Won't bore you with it. But we've got back to about 2000 BC. And all of it seems to fit in with the known histories. Okay? When we were approached by Jim Michael, we supplied him with a little bit of information. Now what we found in the histories of Wales is what has been taught in the schools until about 1920, 1922. All the children in Wales were taught Arthur, son of King Meurig, grandson of King Tudrig, great-grandson of King Teithfal, etc., where he lived, where they were all buried. All this was going on. There was a centralization gradually of education in Wales from about 1860 onwards, which culminated in the 1920s, and everybody had to be taught the same thing. I don't know whether the English government were motivated by the Irish Rising of 1916 and 1922, which frightened them, but history is a powerful weapon. It's a powerful political tool. And there are no textbooks in Wales to teach children Welsh history at this moment. There aren't any. No child is taught any Welsh history other than the bit the teacher might know. So they learn all about William the Conqueror in England and Magna Carta, but they don't learn their own stuff. So we told him what we thought would start him off. If you read the life of Brendan, it starts off, and Brendan heard of the voyage of the Teiran. It means, and Brendan heard of the voyage of the monarch. That's what it means. And Brendan also wished to visit this great land across the oceans or whatever. And they said to Brendan, you will not get there in a boat made of skins. You must go to the men who make ships of timber. So he did. And they agreed to make him a ship of wood. And some of the men who made the ship agreed to sail with him to show him the way. Now, if they're going to show him the way, you've got to ask yourself a question. And you've got to also ask, who was the monarch at the time? Well, if you're talking about the British monarch, then you're talking about Arthur, son of Myric, grandson of Theodoric. That's what you're talking about. Taliesin ap Henwg is well known to be head bard at the court of Arthur. No doubt about that. Taliesin means high intellect. Henwg is a saint in Gwent in South Wales. There's 2 churches of Henwg still surviving there. And Henwg advised the author of the life of St. Samson how to write it around the year 600. Okay? Samson being a nephew of Arthur of Glamorgan. What we didn't know was that there was some hiatus about Maddock, because we had stopped our studies around the year 1100, because we said, look, we're going backwards in time, not forwards in time. We're doing a little bit what Alex Haley did in his roots idea. We didn't want to come forward, we wanted to go backwards. Our assumption was that Maddock had been correctly dated around 1170. There was so much written about him by so many people that you would anticipate they'd done their homework. So we said, Maddock, that's what's known at the moment. Well, it's a problem, because we knew in 1983 that Arthur had sailed west on the Western Ocean around 574. We knew that, because the evidence is monumental. There's not one source, there's dozens. And here we had this Maddock effort. So we said, send us some information. Well, we were sent a book by a gentleman in America on Maddock. We looked at it in an effort to trace Maddock for him. And we threw up our hands in dismay and said, you know, this is ridiculous. What do we do? And the only thing we could think to do was to go back to square one and start from a scratch position with it, which is almost what happened. There were wild statements, you know, nobody knows where Ely is. Wow. It's a big district in Cardiff, 60,000 people live there. Nobody knows who William Fleming was. Wow. He was the High Sheriff of Cardiff. Nobody knows where Matt lived, and so on. And we said, this is absurd, we've got to get to square one. So we really began to look at Maddock again just a couple of years ago. And we found that he's harder to miss than he is to find. And that's not an exaggeration. What have we got here? What has happened in the middle of the 6th century in Britain is one of the best recorded efforts in history. Again, multiple sources, at least a dozen lives of saints, in the histories, in the prophecies of Ere, all over the place. A great comet or other body from outer space struck Britain. Right? It devastated the entire country, right across the south of Britain, and appears to have affected parts of Ireland. It may be the reason why the Scots moved out of Northern Ireland, crossed over, and went into Western Scotland. They were originally in Ireland, because that's what they did at that time. The records are very clear that most of the country had to be evacuated. People fled to the southwestern tip of Britain, Cornwall, they fled to Ireland, and they fled to their kinsmen in Brittany and Ludlow, which later became Normandy. Huge areas could not be lived in for at least 7 and sometimes until 11 years. This is probably the origin of the